Whew. Because of, look, I've been stalled by the VA going on 8 years. But actually I've needed hip replacement surgery now for probably by, I would guess 10 years. But 8 years ago, I was told by a surgeon down in Pittsburgh at the VA that I needed hip replacement surgery. And that was right before COVID. So they used COVID to stall my surgery, I guess. Even though I was told 2 years before COVID that I needed, the surgery. So, what happened is that it's insidious, because, the pain is so stifling. And like I said, insidious because you don't realize that it's, how it slows you down, how sedentary, if that's how you pronounce the word, sedentary, but not cemetery, sedentary, you become. And, I just recognized it one day when I was losing my balance, just to get up and go to the bathroom, walk, just standing up. I'm like, oh shit. And I realized I looked at my chair. I don't know if you can see, but my chair, can you tell? All the finish is worn off of it from me living in it. And, but anyway, look, I bought this, it's a sauna blanket. I got it through Home Depot. $229, I think. It's very expensive, I think. It's the measurement, it's 72 inches long, but if you put your feet in it and zip it up, it'll be really painful on your feet. I recommend that you leave it unzipped, put it on max, do it that way. And I'm wearing a sauna suit underneath, with a sweatsuit underneath this to catch the moisture, catch the water. But, this thing, I don't know how warm it is right now, but it's got me real toasty, It's not long enough to reach up to my upper extremities, but it'll cover my legs and everything, like from my chest down. So I might go ahead and buy another one, charge another one. They've got a good, financing plan if you qualify. Check it out. But as much as I can get approved for a loan, I can't get approved for any dental work. As a disabled veteran, you have to have a 100% rating from the VA to get even an antibiotic for a bodily infection from a tooth. If you're a veteran, you can't have any dental work unless you're 100% rated by them. And I have had abscesses in my jaw, both sides, double visioned infections. I'm fighting infections now. I'm kind of stubborn. There's a couple teeth here that need to be pulled, and there's only these ones in the front that I have left, and I've got 2 in the back and 1 there. But everything's gone. I was maimed at the Pittsburgh School of Dental Medicine. They did a big extraction on the bottom and didn't suture. And now I have to be careful because I drool. Because it all flattened out. It got infected. Kid was really sadistic. In Christ, I had to pray, give me strength, that I didn't return evil for evil, because that guy, if I was in the world, I probably would have hunted him down and, probably would have hurt him. It's really sadistic. You run into these things, But in Jesus' name, that's not, it's not part of my thinking. Hallelujah. I rejoice in that. Hear me. I'm telling the truth, man. So anyway, this sauna blanket, it does get your heart rate up, man. I can feel it, my heart rate is getting up. The heat, it's not a lot of heat. Like, it's not the same as getting into a blasting steam room or something, but I've been in this thing for 96 minutes. It's, so you know what it is. It's not, I'm sweating, but it is nothing like if you were in a real sauna. But my activity, man, the pain, even though it took me years for them to give me any pain medication because of this war on opiates, and anyone that really needs pain medications as a tool, so they can try to schedule their time so that they can maybe try to get some type of activity in, to keep moving. That tool, they've taken from so many veterans. And just like stalling me, going on 8 years now. Why that's done, it's, I believe, it makes sense, doesn't it? That, it's expensive if they were to care for all of our veterans, right. So, if I were a captain, if I were a colonel, if I were a major, if I were a butter bar, even, I think they would have got the procedure, the hip replacement would have been done within a year, don't you think? Yeah, rank does have its privileges, even in a veteran healthcare system, the largest healthcare system in our nation. So think about that as our Israel First representatives, those Israel First allegiance to the nation state of Israel. Steal billions of dollars from our tax base for this war that they're fighting for Israel, right? All for Israel. All for Israel. That's what it is, all for Israel. Entirely. Cursed, not blessed. But they just allocated another $200 billion for this mistake. And our veterans, our disabled veterans, can't even get an antibiotic for an infection from a tooth unless they have 100% rating from the VA. And I speak the truth when I tell you that. That's a fact. It stands to reason. People die from, infections with their teeth. The infections can take you out. If they don't take you out, they can weaken you in such a way that something else will take you out. If you're, it's true. So, I've asked our president, this administration, for a fair and just result for what was done to me while I was in service to our nation. While in service to our nation, I started off my service. My service was, first of all, in the Army National Guard. And what had happened was, look at that fat face. Mom, I hardly have any activity, man. What? You see, my family, working poor, they came into money. Someone had left them money when I was a teenager, and I got to see how the money, affected them, and they didn't want any part of me, and I wasn't in their plans for whatever motor homes and horse trailers and property and all whatever the hell they wanted to do. And I was happy they were able to have something. But, me, man, they were glad when I left home, like my 16th birthday, and I went to the recruiter and I was like, what can I do here? And I was like, oh, maybe if I join the Guard, come back home, things would have changed. And just to get away, and the recruiter had to come out to the house to get my mom and dad to sign me over to the government. And I had my 18th birthday while basic training at Fort Jackson in 1983. And while I was in that basic training cycle, where's the camera? Is it up here? That's when our Marines were killed in Beirut in 1983. And it was weird because you don't get anything from the outside, no newspapers or, at that time, nothing. You're cut off from the outside. And our battalion was gathered at attention in this hall, seated at attention. And my senior drill instructor came out in full BDUs, with a face paint and everything, and he's got an M16. He had an M16 then, and he comes out, in his BDUs already, in combat gear, and he vociferously, he's like, "The balloon has gone up. We're at war." And he filled us in about the Marines being killed in Beirut, and he said, "Your primary MOS is infantry. Now every one of you are infantry, and we are going to deploy." He was so excited. He said, "Anyone that doesn't like that idea, file out into the, aisles." And I was white-knuckled, like, hold on to my seat. I'm like, oh, shit. Like, those fold-out seats were what we were seated in. And I thought, oh, hell, man, I could never face anybody if I fucking... So I didn't get up, but a lot of guys did. And then throughout training, we'd see those guys in their own platoon. A platoon of, what are they called? There was a name for them then, but it doesn't matter. And we would see them all the time. They were there at the same amount of time we were, but in this other platoon, that they were fucking brutalized, Every time we'd see them, they'd be doing drill, and they just fucking abused them until they, got rid of them. They were there all the way to when we graduated. Who knows, maybe beyond. But you see, I quit school. You can do that in the Army, not the Air Force, so I learned. Because when I got to my headquarters, my battalion, the 229th Field Artillery Battalion in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. When I got there and I was in a Guard for like a year and a half, I was like, damn, I want to go active, but I don't want the Army. And I'll tell you why I didn't want the Army in a moment. But you see, I wanted the Air Force. And the only way I could get in the Air Force is if I had a high school diploma. So I contacted, my high school, and I'm like, how many credits do I need to graduate? And I needed 4 credits. 4. Correspondingly, they were taken care of. And I got the same diploma as my class. If I would have graduated, I graduated. It was just like I graduated with them. So I went in the Air Force. But while I was going through Army boot camp, why I didn't want the Army, let me tell you what happened. The recruiter, the National Guardsman, the recruiter, Army National Guard, he'd given me this bonus for this MOS. And I think that also was used to flag me the same way I was flagged as, a high school dropout. Flagged for what, you ask, maybe, huh? We were separated from my platoon, from the battalion. All the guys who were in National Guardsmen that I know of, and maybe reservists too, I think it was. And it gave us something, man. I had an adrenaline hit. It's rare. I could tell you the times I've had an adrenaline hit in my life. You could count it on one hand, man. And I had a real serious adrenaline hit. And I asked the nurse, phlebotomist, this nurse that was getting us ready for the shots that we were getting in this separate line. I said, why did they separate us? We're all getting the same shots. And it's just a small line. And she just looked at me like she felt so sorry for me. And I was like, oh, fuck. Well, you know, I knew something was up. I'm like, what the fuck are they giving us? Well, myself and all of those guys that were in that line, we barely made it through boot camp. We got so sick. And then they brought us back to give us additional shots too. But I was in the best shape of my life. I barely made it through boot camp. I was so sick. My heart's pounding. It's because of the sauna blanket. When I went to AIT at Fort Gordon, the bay that I was in, I think it was planned this way. It was contagious what they had given me. Because my coughing, they all got it and they were all taken away. They were all hospitalized, I guess. I never saw them again. The contagion was so serious with whatever it was that they gave us that our battalion commander going through training there at Fort Gordon, he came out and he was telling us gargle with salt water, and he was like, you know, but you know, it was really weird. I don't remember my training. All I remember was being so damn sick. That's how bad, that's how sick I was. I had a brain fog and everything. I was stubborn, man. I was like, you're not going to recycle me. And I got back to my home unit in Newcastle, 229th. And I was telling everybody, including our battalion commander and our first sergeant and everyone. No one wanted to even listen to what I had to say. They were like, yeah? What? So that sickness, you know, every time my immune system would get hammered in any way, the same symptoms would come back. And, you know, it would like go into like walking pneumonia. And I'd have to get antibiotics, you know, because the virus would turn into an infection in my lungs, especially my lungs. And I didn't have health care. You don't when you're a guardsman or reservist, though. You know, you're at no expense to whoever it was that was conducting this test, as we were used as guinea pigs. Well, you know, you can be monitored from a distance, right? Whatever disease you succumb to, I guess. Every time I get sick, you know, my mother, she had access to horse antibiotics. Or I could go to a pet store and I learned that ciprofloxacin would help me out of a, you know, whatever I could get my hands on, you know, antibiotics. I'd try, and some didn't work, man, some did. If I could ever get a Z-Pack, taking 2 Z-Packs would do it. It would get it out of my system. Would make it so that it would crush it, and then, but it would always return, you know, whenever I would go maybe stay up too many hours or do something that was too taxing on my body, you know. Through the years, man, I had some close calls. It was flagged as a retrovirus when I did have health care for a minute. My wife worked for Greater New York Insurance in Manhattan, and we lived up there in those environs. It was flagged, and I had a blood test as a retrovirus. Whatever it was they gave me, whatever designer virus, in some special virus program. Yeah, the barracks that we went through boot camp in, they were those World War II barracks atop of Tank Hill. And they tore them out right after our cycle. We were the last cycle to go through the barracks atop of Tank Hill in those World War II barracks. My uncle, Robert Svetlik, Bobby Svetlik, who was in Vietnam, he went through the same barracks that I went through in training. The same barracks. Isn't that something? He died from exposure to Agent Orange. It got him, you know, got him late. Man, he was ate up. It was bad. But when I got COVID, my wife and we couldn't get on any protocol because of the politics. I was like, what the hell am I going to do? And I was familiar with ivermectin, being raised on a horse farm, and then a horse farm. I knew about ivermectin. We warmed our horses with it and warmed our dogs with it. So I wasn't concerned about taking it. I never saw any deleterious effects on the animals, so I took it, and it squelched, COVID-19. Each time my wife and I took it, we had COVID twice. And it also seemed to help with this retrovirus, an antiviral. Unless that's all in Jesus' name, placebo, but God healing me, God, me believing it. I don't know. But that retrovirus, man, we were used as, you figure high school dropouts, bing, they're considered kind of worthless, right? Good to use in experiments. Guardsmen, reservists, no health care, no expense to our government. Good test subjects. I joined the Air Force. There was a very prejudiced NCOIC that I had when I got to my duty station, Eltis Air Force Base. I was dating this black girl from the hospital squadron, an Air Force member, Sherelle Turner, her name. We got married, but my NCOIC was so prejudiced. He'd make me miserable, man. He'd get me alone and fucking taunt me. He was so sadistic. He made my life pretty miserable. And everyone in the shop, in my duty shop, they were like, hey, don't worry, this guy is a fucking asshole. We know. I'm like, yeah, but nobody's doing anything. So I said, you know what? Nobody in my detachment, because I was in a detachment from my squadron was the 1365th Audiovisual Squadron out of Lackland Air Force Base. That's where my command was. So I was in a detachment, Detachment 4. Nobody would help me in Detachment 4. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go to base social actions. I went over there and the CO, his name is Captain Ayers, was Captain Ayers. And I could tell, man, he was like Malcolm X with an attitude. He was really ate up with it, prejudiced. And I was like, oh man, did I make a mistake coming here? I was like, I see that this is not a place to be for reverse discrimination. This social actions is entirely set up, this base social actions was set up entirely for blacks. I got back to my detachment, and my NCOIC, Sergeant Stanley Beauchamp, first thing he said to me, and I'm going to talk to you and let you hear what he sounded like, because I'll never forget it, this guy. He's from Kentucky. He said, hey, I'm in kosher. I just got off the phone with Captain Ayers. Him and I are good friends. I've known him a long time. He said you were just over there saying bad things about me. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I couldn't get any help. I reached out to my aunt, my Uncle Bob's wife, Bob Swetlick, his wife, Leoma Swetlick, one of my closest friends, my entire conscious, life. My Aunt Omi, Aunt O, I called her. I told her what was happening. She said, Jimmy, she said, I know my congressional representative here in District 17. I'll talk to him for you. At the time, I don't know, I was young, naive. Hell, it took me a couple of weeks thinking about it. I'm like, maybe that isn't such a good idea. I called my aunt back and I'm like, hey, maybe that's not a good idea, And she said, Jimmy, I've already called him, I already talked to him. So now I'm like thinking, what the hell, if he looks into this, if his office looks into this, it was motivation for me. That my shit was, I was steeped in my work anyway, but it got me real serious, man. And the time that it took for that congressional inquiry to hit the base, Eltis Air Force Base, that from the phone call my aunt had, it took a long time, man. And in that time, I had become the best, recognized as, awarded as being the best that the United States Air Force had in my AFSC. And then they told me that they were cutting orders for me to serve at the Pentagon in honor of that. And man, I was cloud nine in it for a while. I was like, holy shit. My work ethic, you know, I knew that when I went there, I'd have been setting my sights on working for the president. I mean, that's the kind of motivation I had, kind of work ethic, and some talent too, I suppose. But it wasn't long after I was told that I was awaiting orders that were being cut from my headquarters squadron in Lackland, that then I was told, somebody whispered in my ear, hey, you know, because I had talked to people in my shop about this shit that Beauchamp had done, and I told them I had talked to my aunt, some people that I trusted in my shop, in my workplace. They knew that my aunt had contacted a congressman, and I was told that the inquiry had hit the base, and that my base commander, Colonel Hazeltine, was passed over for Brigadier General. The next thing I know, there were two airmen, Airman Bemis and Airman Dallaire. They stood in my way of this room, a CompuGraphics room. We were like the first, unit in the Air Force to get CompuGraphics. Had a lot to do with probably my being awarded as the best the Air Force had and all that. I was coming out of that room, and Airman Dallaire and Airman Bemis were standing in my way, not letting me out. And I was like, man, I knew what time it was. I was smart enough to know they're fucking setting me up. But I still said, kind of like pissed, get the fuck out of my way, because, I was riding a razor's edge anyway, because all of the fucking harassment by Beauchamp and people in my wife's, hospital squadron. We got married, and man, they were making our lives miserable. And we had come into the agreement that we would get a divorce. It was that bad, So they took me out of my workplace because I talked that way to two airmen. And they had me working with prisoners on the base, yet I was not assigned with them, I wasn't a prisoner is what I'm saying. I was just assigned to work there. I'm checking the time I've been in this thing. Well, almost 120 minutes. You see, I should be dripping with sweat. But no activity, it has a lot to do with it. If I was moving a little bit, I would probably be dripping with sweat in this sauna blanket. But anyway, I was raised on a farm in western Pennsylvania. And, you learn humility working on a farm in a lot of ways. I suppose they were trying to break me. I intuited that they were trying to figure out a way to fire me. Try to make me look like I was the problem. I was a bad airman. But what a challenge they had, work ahead of them, being that I was recognized and awarded as being the best that the Air Force had at that time in my AFSC. And I was waiting for orders to serve at the Pentagon in honor of that. So I'm like, what's going to happen with this? They'd call me into my duty station, my detachment, and would have me do tasks that they would disqualify me on. They were backdating and fabricating my records. And my last duty was that base command took me, and they had me seated at attention in this area in the back of base command where nobody came through. I saw one person come through other than the first sergeant and the staff sergeant, or I think it was a tech or a staff. It was a staff. They had seated in front of me to make sure that I would stay at attention. They had me seated there so long that I lost track of time. I lost track of the days. And I don't like revisiting it. I really am not going to. But I had a moment. I had a time that, I recognized as like, oh, that's what it is to have something snap. because, you know, I had injuries that they wouldn't let me go to the hospital for that required my having to have 2 spinal fusions when I got out. And I couldn't get the help right away from the VA. I suffered many years needing 2 spinal fusions. So them having me seated at attention was real torture, you know. What I remember is that I thought about, you know, I would have to fight whoever then was complicit in it all in my workplace, because now it was several people that I would have to, you know, come up against. I knew I could beat it, but I have to admit, they're just about taking the fight out of me. So I agreed to sign whatever it is that they wanted without even looking at it. Then I remember it was 4 days. Additionally, they had me seated at attention. And that really fucking, I thought, was sadistic. I'm like, here I am, I'm agreeing to, I have acquiesced. I've capitulated, you got me. I'll sign whatever you want me to. And they kept me there for 4 more days. And then I signed what it is they wanted me to. And the first sergeant of the base command, I could tell that he had a change of mind with me. He held on to the paperwork. He said, you know, you don't have to sign this. He told me that. This is after all that torture. You know, it was a matter of being put at attention by direct order. And I followed the direct order, you know, and it was torture. And I signed it. And then I was released from the Air Force. When I got home, I had to put everything behind me. I had dress blues from the Air Force and dress greens from the Army National Guard, and I burnt them all in a burning barrel because I had to put everything behind me. Who would believe me? But you know, there were a couple things that I captured in Jesus' name. I captured the most complete World Trade Center attack video when I lived up there. I waited 10 years until I released that. The NSA and FBI, probably everybody, had done a background search on me when I released it. Because it got a lot of attention at first from, you know, it became like a fly trap. You know, like one of those sticky fly traps. Because they took the account away from me and just used it to investigate anyone that showed too much interest in all of what I had on there with the chronicle of the attacks, and then a gallery of images, you know, that I rendered in different ways. So, well, I had that. You see, also, I captured what was the fallout that was hidden from thousands of people here in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, District 17, ironically, the same district. You know, but how many years later? 35 years later, something like that. I captured this video of, you know, millions of pounds of carcinogens, industrial hazardous materials that fell out and onto Pennsylvanians, Lawrence and Beaver County. It was a multi-billion-dollar disaster here that Norfolk Southern, working with whoever it was they were hauling the at least 34 containers, 34, not 5, 34 containers that were labeled as carrying hazardous materials that they illegally disposed of, burnt off over a 3-day period from February 3rd, when they told the firemen that got there to not put out the fires, through the 6th, when they lied and said there was a container that they had to let pressure off of or it was going to explode, but then they said that, so Governor DeWine declared a false state of emergency. He activated our Army National Guard to stand as sentry, to keep people like me out of there from recording, from capturing what they had to do with the preparations for the massive illegal burn-off of everything that was left on the site. Because they had to go in there and put the fires out that they had said for 3 days that they couldn't get near. They had to bring heavy equipment in and dig out trenches and pump that highly flammable, carcinogenic industrial chemical out of those containers into those troughs that they had made along the tracks with the heavy equipment. And they lit it up on the 6th. You might have remembered the plume. But the wind carried it all onto Pennsylvania. It went up high with the heat, and then the winds carried it over. And the Honorable Sil Sagano from the Youngstown Fire Department, a chief, he went on Channel 27 News on the 5th, the day before they did that massive illegal burn-off of whatever was left of at least 34 railroad containers. And he said, don't do it. He said, these chemicals, he said, they got properties by which they're the particles are going to attract water molecules. They're going to get heavy and they're going to fall. And that's what my video bears out, is that all of that shit fell out. When it disappeared off of the radar, it's because it all fell out on the ground, everything. And thousands of people were left oblivious. I recorded WTAE, Channel 4 Action News, in one of my videos on the 6th. They could have aired the footage, given thousands of people a chance to mitigate the contamination, taping up the windows and doors, sheltering in place, but they kept quiet, along with every other network and every authority. They were all following the directive of who it was that illegally burnt the shit off. See, they managed that massive illegal burn-off in East Palestine, in safety, along with the firefighters who were standing there west of the derailment, posing for the media, to make it look like they were trying to put out the fires. Like I said, they were told to not put out the fires. They were essentially props for the media. In truth, everything I just said is true. Entirely, irrefutably true. The radar evidence, the history, over that 3 days, all proves that the winds blew to the east. The derailment was on the Pennsylvania border. It all went into Pennsylvania, onto Pennsylvania. It didn't go up into the atmosphere and over 5 states. That was all something to obfuscate. So they kept it quiet. The Sunday before they did that, before the Honorable Sil Sagano, Fire Chief of Youngstown, went on Channel 27, I'd gone up off of Route 51, looking down the tracks towards East Palestine. But like I said, it happened east of East Palestine, even east of the town sign, It was on the outskirts of the town, but it was on the Pennsylvania border. But I recorded that they were burning off containers on the tracks in Pennsylvania. I sent that out to all the media that I could think of, all in the alphabet, whatever I could think of, everybody. Somebody contacted them where they were managing the illegal burn-off in East Palestine and told them. And that's when they made up the story. They're like, they made up the story because I wrote a note with the footage I captured on the 5th of February, 2023. And I said, coming from a farm boy experience, a gas can, you think if it's full and it's burning, it's not going to blow up. But if it empties, then air can suck into it and it can explode if the container's hot. And I was thinking about the same thing about those containers. And I said that in a note. And they read my note and they were like, if that dummy believes it, maybe everybody will. So they made up a story and said that they needed to go in and take pressure off of one container. They said that was volatile, that was building up pressure, that was going to explode. Hence, they called that illegal burn-off of everything that was left of the 34 containers that were carrying carcinogenic, industrial, hazardous materials. Truth. They used that story to Governor DeWine declared a false state of emergency. He activated our Army National Guard, and they stood in a place where they could keep people from capturing their preparations of them putting out the fires, digging trenches along the tracks, all that shit. You know, they could have pumped the stuff out on either side of the tracks and taken it to, we got special facilities in our nation that deal with hazardous materials, you know, incinerators and filtration systems that nullify those hazardous materials, but they decided to fucking burn it all off. And they didn't consult with enough people because it got heavy, just like Sil Sagano said, the particles, they had a tendency, they collected water molecules, got heavy, and fell. You can see it in my videos. Some places there are cones, big, huge cones coming out of the center of the clouds. Those clouds were all hazardous. You know, they were laden with carcinogenic chemicals, but you'd see these cones falling out where they were real heavy in those smoke clouds. Watch my videos, you'll see it, I'm telling the truth. So there were areas that if there would have been human beings there, it would have killed them. It was a miracle that no one died. They probably thought that night, everybody who did that, involved in that illegal burn-off and everything, they probably thought they were going to have another Bhopal on their hands, a mass fatality situation. It was a miracle that they didn't. But I was surveilled, monitored for months, real tight, so that I couldn't share that footage, as they supplanted the lying narrative that it was East Palestine, where none of the winds ever blew that contamination into. East Palestine is a lie. Ohio is a lie. It's what's it called? A settlement that it's all the way around. I'm having trouble here. What is it called? I'm saying half of the people that they paid off in their silencing settlement or radius from the derailment. All those people west of the derailment, they didn't get the contamination, yet they paid them what they paid the people in Pennsylvania, basing it on five containers. Not 34, but 5. I think they're paying them off now. You see, I opted out because in Jesus' name, I know Yah had caused to become that. I captured the video and I released it immediately. People might need me later on, seeing as they have never mentioned Pennsylvania in any news reports. But I said, you know, I contacted the Biden administration and then the Trump administration. I've been steady on them, left them hundreds of hours of a thread, you know, to President Trump. I'm like telling him all about that and all about the shit that I just mentioned so glib. I said, sir, I would appreciate a fair and just result. You know, there was no formality with my civil liberties being stomped on, that I've been surveilled tight, not allowed to share that footage, to hide, you know, so that the multi-billion dollar corporations could keep from having to pay for what was a multi-billion dollar disaster. I said, but sir, I released everything. I said, what about some decency here? I opted out of their shit. I said, I'm sure that my records have been gone into. I said, why don't you please consider giving me a fair and just result for what was done to me while I served our nation honorably with distinction. So I had a number that I've been coming at them with every time. I'm like, consider that I had orders that were being cut for me to serve at the Pentagon. I was recognized as being the best that the Air Force had in my AFSC. I didn't have to even go to NCO school or anything. They passed. I was able to pass over all that shit. They don't do that. You hear me what I'm saying? In truth, I'm telling you the truth. I said, where could I have gone? I was at the pinnacle of where an enlisted man could be at that time, and I'm like, you know what? My ambition, my talent, I believe I would have gone to the height of whatever an enlisted man could go. My sights would have been to serve the president, to have projects, in the administration. In truth. So I did come up with a number. I'm like, how about pay grade E8, retirement status, with back pay from the date of discharge, July 26th, 1989. I said, please consider that a fair and just result, and please expedite it, because I said, I've been waiting now it's been over 8 years, but going on 8 years since they told me that I needed hip replacement surgery at the VA in Pittsburgh. I'm going to need amenities. I'm going to need some help here climbing out of this hole that the VA has once again put me in. Well, I still have the will, which I do, but I'm going to need to get a few things, like maybe a hyperbolic oxygen chamber to help me with my healing when I undergo the surgery. Maybe a wading pool, something I can get in and move around in with buoyancy gear on, underground, a freshwater pool inside wherever I move to. I want to move from Darlington here. This place fucking sucks. But whatever that is, the money I asked for, compensation, deposit the money in my account. I said, you go get the money from Norfolk Southern if you have to, or keep back some of the billions, hundreds of billions you're giving to the nation state of Israel, and give me a fair and just result. A disabled veteran that served this nation honorably with distinction. I said, there were no formalities with my being closely surveilled and not being able to share what was done here. In truth, I'm telling you. I said, drop the formalities and just process this, expedite a fair and just result for me. And I need it now, please. Today. Please. I've left the messages with